The transatlantic slave trade remains one of the most significant and painful chapters in human history. For over 4 centuries, millions of African men, women, and children were forcibly taken from their homeland, shipped across the ocean, and sold into slavery in foreign lands. This system did not appear overnight. It grew slowly, expanded rapidly, and changed the future of Africa forever. Before the transatlantic slave trade, African societies were rich and diverse. There were kingdoms, empires, farmers, traders, scholars, soldiers, and artisans. People lived in structured communities, practiced their own systems of governance, and built economies that sustained millions. Africa was not empty. It was full of life, culture, and progress. This is the world the slave trade would soon disrupt. In the 1400s, European explorers reached the West African coast. At first, they traded peacefully, exchanging goods for gold, ivory, and spices. But as European colonies in the Americas grew, something changed. The demand for labor exploded. Plantations could not survive without workers, and the colonizers began to seek forced labor on a massive scale. Thus began the transatlantic slave trade. Millions of Africans were captured through raids, wars, or kidnapping. Entire villages were attacked. Families were separated without warning. Those captured were tied, chained, or forced to march long distances to the coast. This journey, known as the March to the Coast, could last weeks. Many never survived it. At the coast, captives were held in fortresses built specifically for the trade. These places were overcrowded, hot, and filled with disease. People were kept in darkness for days or even months, waiting for ships to arrive. When the ships finally came, the captives were branded, inspected, and forced into the cargo holds. The journey across the Atlantic, known as the Middle Passage, was one of the most brutal voyages in human history. People were chained together, packed tightly, and given little food or water. The air below deck was suffocating. Diseases spread quickly. Storms struck the ships. It is estimated that between 10% and 20% of those taken never reached the other side. Those who survived the Middle Passage were taken to markets in the Caribbean, South America, and North America. There, they were sold at auctions, treated as property instead of human beings. Families were separated again. Children were sold apart from their parents. People were forced to work on plantations under harsh conditions, often from sunrise to sunset. The slave trade left deep scars on Africa. Millions of people, the young, the strong, the skilled, were removed from their communities. Entire regions lost generations of farmers, builders, and leaders. Economic progress slowed. Wars increased. Traditional systems weakened. The long-term damage still affects the continent today. But Africans did not submit quietly. There were rebellions, escapes, and organized resistance. Villages fortified themselves. Leaders fought against slave raiders. Some groups refused to participate in the trade entirely. Resistance existed both in Africa and in the Americas. By the late 1700s, the world began to change. People across Europe and the Americas started to speak out against slavery. New ideas about human rights emerged. Abolitionist groups formed. Petitions were signed. Courts challenged the legality of the trade. Slowly, one country after another began to abolish the transatlantic slave trade. The slave trade did not end instantly. It took decades of pressure, laws, and enforcement to fully shut it down. By the late 1800s, the transatlantic slave trade was finally abolished. But its impact remained. The legacy of the slave trade is still visible today, in identity, in culture, in family histories, and in the global African diaspora. Yet Africa continues to rise. New generations are reclaiming history, rebuilding identity, and telling stories once hidden or ignored. Understanding this past is not about reopening wounds, but about honoring those who lived through it, and learning from the history that shaped the world. The slave trade era is more than a timeline. It is a reminder of humanity's darkest and brightest moments. A story of suffering, survival, and resilience. Thank you for watching. If you want more African history documentaries, subscribe for the next episode.